Yo, what's up guys, it's TECHOSAUR. Today, we are diving into a feature that become a big deal on modern GPUs. I'm talking about resizable bar, or base address register. You've probably seen it tossed around in benchmarks, or maybe even heard big claims that enabling it can boost performance by 10% or more. But is it really that simple? Spoiler alert, no. And in this video, I'll show you why. We'll test what happens when you disable it, force it on, and leave it at Nvidia default, and try to explain the mechanism behind it. Let's start with how to check if ReBAR is actually enabled on your system. You can do so by installing GPU-Z by TechPower app, and you can see, for example, mine is currently enabled. If you click on its status there, you can see the following detailed stats like GPU hardware support saying yes, above 4G decoding, and resizable bar enabled in BIOS. And down below, you will see bar value showing that your CPU has full access to the GPU VRAM capacity, meaning it can access it instantly and whenever it needs. Now I want to show you what happens if I head over to the BIOS and disable both above 4G decoding, which allows the system to map PCI devices above 4G GB memory, as well as resizable bar support. So when I disable them in the BIOS and open GPU-Z again, you will find that the resizable bar option is now disabled, and that makes sense. And if I click on it, you will see now it says the accessible VRAM at the time is 256 MB. This means the CPU can only access 256 MB at a time. And this results in lots of small transfers overhead, slower texture loads, and potentially even stuttering in games. With resizable bar enabled, the CPU can access the entire VRAM of the GPU, instead of just 256 MB blocks at a time. This allows for a faster asset streaming and reduced overhead, which can lead to smoother performance, but only in games and engines that are built to take advantage of it. But here is the catch: resizable bar only helps when the CPU is actively feeding large amounts of data to the GPU, which usually happens in GPU-bound scenarios, especially with modern games engines or APIs like DirectX 12 or Vulkan, where assets are streamed heavily. If the game is CPU bound, ReBAR won't make a difference, because the bottleneck isn't memory access, it's processing power. In fact, forcing ReBAR globally can sometimes introduce extra latency, slightly hurting performance, especially in minimum FPS, not the average ones. Keep that statement in mind, because according to Jayz, a well-known tech YouTuber, Nvidia has a dumb driver bug resulting in 10% lower FPS. So what's the deal? He said in his recent video that even with the resizable bar enabled in BIOS, he was getting low FPS in 3D Mark Port Royal benchmark, and he fixed it by forcing ReBAR to be on by using Nvidia Profile Inspector, a tool you can find for free on GitHub. So he forced ReBAR by altering the global profile, changing it from default disabled to enabled, and adjusting the ReBAR options and size limit as shown here. And as he said, the result was a huge uplift in his case. Now, I'm not typically one to call out others, and I respect Jayz, but I'm here to say that his conclusion about it being an Nvidia driver bug doesn't hold up in the product testing. Because ReBAR isn't always beneficial, like I said, it's as simple as this. If you are GPU bound, especially in dense open world games or heavier engines at higher resolution, ReBAR allows the CPU to access the entire VRAM instead of just 256 MB chunks, which can improve texture and asset streaming. But if the game isn't GPU bound or isn't designed to take advantage of large memory transactions, forcing ReBAR can actually reduce performance or cause stuttering. So there is no universal rule for keeping ReBAR always on. It really depends on the game and how you are controlling the graphics settings, as well as resolution. And thankfully, Nvidia intentionally disabled ReBAR at the global level to avoid issues in titles that don't benefit and may even perform modes with it enabled. Actually, the bug would have been if it were globally enabled. Like you see, some example titles that benefit from ReBAR, including open world games like Cyberpunk 2077 or DX12, or Vulkan games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla. While it's not useful in older DX11 games like Borderlands 3 or CPU-bound FPS titles like Rainbow Six Siege. Counter-Strike 2, and most linear games. Of course, I didn't make this video just to talk. I needed to prove it with real facts. So I got Nvidia Profile Inspector tool, selected the global profile, and went down to section 5 common to force ReBAR on. Then I selected the option that says returner / Red Dead Redemption 2, the one Jayz said to use, and finally set the size limit to the one that says Red Dead Redemption 2 with a bunch of hex codes. I applied the changes, restarted the PC, and reopened the tool to confirm. They were successfully applied, just like Jayz suggested. Also for extra info, I have my RTX 5090 overclocked to the max, including the memory clock as well. The GPU specifically I'm using is RTX 5090 AORUS XTREME, and I believe it's a very good one for this test. Anyway, with that said, let's get now to the benchmarks. To spice things up, I have 3 setups to compare. The left one is when I turned off above 4G decoding and ReBAR in BIOS. The middle is when they are enabled in BIOS, with the driver settings being set to Nvidia default, like what you would normally get on default when you just have Resizable BAR on BIOS level activated. And finally, the right is when I have ReBAR on in BIOS and forced it globally to be on by using Nvidia Profile Inspector. Initially, when I saw this exact benchmark, I was like, awesome, we got a nice 300-point increase in time spy. You can see the effect is mostly on the graphics side, so it clearly did something with ReBAR on. Then I did time spy extreme, and we see almost no difference. In fact, with ReBAR off, it's slightly higher than others, so it doesn't really make sense. Next test was Port Royal, and in my case, with ReBAR forced on, I got actually a lower score. Then I did Steel Nomad, again with ReBAR forced on, the score is slightly lower. Finally, in Speedway, they are all identical, like the score is already in the excellent grade, so I don't really need to complain. Alright, now that we've seen all the 3D Mark benchmarks, let's test real ground, gaming. I use the same 3 setups again and tested 5 selected games in 2 resolutions, 1080p and 1440p, both at high graphic presets to make sure the GPU is the bottleneck, not the CPU, so we can see the results more clearly. In Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p, you can see with ReBAR forced on, it's technically the highest FPS, but not far off enough to call it a clear uplift. With it off, it's almost the same, like there is so much similarity here. Instead, at 1440p, the gap is more visible. With ReBAR off, FPS is noticeably lower by around 12 FPS compared to when we forced ReBAR to be on. Now, given that we have cranked resolution higher to 1440p, the CPU start to benefit from higher VRAM access, so I would say it's a win for this title. Next up is Horizon Zero Dawn. At 1080p, with ReBAR off, it's clearly better than when it's on, whether by default or forced to be enabled. Same at 1440p, when it's off, it's still better than the 2 other setups. So clearly for this title, having ReBAR off, even from BIOS, gave me better results. Next game is Formula 1 24. At 1080p, the default setting gives us 511 FPS. Behind that is ReBAR off by around 13 FPS. And last place is ReBAR when it's forced on. At 1440p, forced ReBAR is actually better. So we start to see lots of inconsistency from title to another. But I promise it won't be the case in the next game, which shows concrete difference, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. At 1080p, forced ReBAR is definitely leading, along with default on. It's way behind when we turned it off in BIOS. You can see, like what I said, this title benefits greatly from Resizable BAR. It just depends on the title, and Assassin's Creed and Far Cry games usually do, due to being open world games with high resolution textures, etc. Again, at 1440p, whether it's on by default or forced, it's the same. But with ReBAR off, it's 20 FPS lower, so we can definitely see the benefit here. And it's the exact same case with Forza Horizon 5. With its vast open world, it benefits from ReBAR, whether forced or driver default. And the FPS is higher by 30 than when it's off from BIOS. At 1440p, it gets even worse, around a 40 FPS gap. But you can also see that whether it's forced or default, the results are about the same. And that's because Nvidia actually goes out and tests every recent game before releasing a game-ready driver and enables ReBAR on a per-title basis. You can see this list of games in the Nvidia Profile Inspector, which is actually all the games stored in the Nvidia driver. Like we have tons of game profiles here, like Stalker 2 has ReBAR enabled, Saints Row has some special ReBAR options, Sea of Thieves, for example, has it off, Wukong has it on, Horizon Zero Dawn enabled, but in the benchmark we saw better performance with it off. Could be due to the benchmark tool versus real gameplay difference. Like they might have optimized it for real gameplay rather than running better on benchmark. Still, when we forced ReBAR globally, we didn't see anything different from when it was already enabled by Nvidia whitelist while also having the resizable bar enabled in BIOS. Same with Cyberpunk, it benefits, so Nvidia turned it on. But for Elden Ring and Dark Souls 3, it's off. Again, finally for 3D Mark Time Spy and Port Royal, both have ReBAR off. As an extra game to test, I ran Rainbow Six Siege at high 1440p. You can see that when we forced ReBAR on, we have hurt our low FPS significantly. The game was literally stuttering. With ReBAR off or left on default, which is probably off for this title, low FPS got no negative impact and performance was smooth. So forcing ReBAR globally has introduced issues here. As an extra taste, you would expect that at 4K, with altered textures and a fully GPU-bound workload, resizable bar will give a clear uplift. But in reality, in most cases, it won't. In my testing across these titles, whether ReBAR was off, enabled by default, or forced globally, performance was quite similar. ReBAR only helps when the game engine actually benefits from CPU direct access to large chunks of VRAM for texture and asset streaming, like the case for Forza Horizon 5 and Assassin's Creed Valhalla, as I said. Still, whether it was globally forced or left to default per game profile basis, it gave me nearly identical FPS as you can see. So mostly often, it won't be a large performance factor in 4K. So in case you applied this tweak and want to revert the global profile back to default, just go up here in Profile Inspector and click Reset to Default and refresh. You should see it back to normal. So guys, as a takeaway, don't ever attempt to force resizable bar on the global profile. It's not a bug and it's not a magic performance tweak. Nvidia intentionally manages it on a game-by-game basis because it varies by title, engine, API, and optimization. Yes, we know Nvidia has made plenty of driver mistakes this year, but they are not dumb enough to leave resizable bar globally off without a reason. They've created a tested whitelist system and activate ReBAR based on real validation. Anyway guys, I respect Jayz for his good impact on the tech community and he make really cool videos. And actually he's among the people that were the inspiration of me making this channel. But as tech channels, we all have a responsibility to give advice that actually helps people, not hurt them. I know Jayz wants all good for others, but he should have done more than port royal testing or at least clarifying more before making a thumbnail that may have overstated the issue. That's why I made this video. I just don't want people getting caught up in this mistake. I appreciate you for tuning in. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share this video with anyone who will benefit from it. Also, if you have tried this tweak out, let me know about your experience in the comments below. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.